There's a quote from Werner von Braun in there where he's talking about the V2 rocket. And he says the rocket worked perfectly, except it landed on the wrong planet, which I thought was a pretty damn funny quote.
Yeah. You know, I never personally met von Braun, but I was in some meetings with him. I
Oh,
remember his kind of curly hair in the back. And,
You're good.
well, let's see. We're about 7 time zones apart, or maybe 8. What time is it where you are, Craig? Unmute. Unmute.
It's 4 p.m. It's not late yet.
Yeah, all right.
What?
So we are 8 time zones apart.
Yes. Okay.
And I saw John Byrne on here momentarily, at least. He was wearing a
He is. Yeah, he's just in the attendee zone or whatever.
okay.
Yeah.
He had a striped shirt on, reminded me of the old time sailors.
Okay, we ready? Can I
I'm
proceed?
ready. I'm ready.
Yeah. Okay. All right, we're gonna call the April 24th, 2025 Budget Committee meeting to order. We have the full Budget Committee members here. Roger, Dan, Craig, Chris, and myself. Then we have some members of the staff. John Byrne is participating on Zoom, kind of here somewhere. And then we haven't received any members of the public yet, but we might get some folks walk in the door. First item on the agenda is discussion and possible action to adopt the minutes of the March 12th Budget Committee meeting. I
Move we adopt the minutes from the March 12th Budget Committee meeting.
I second that.
think I heard Dan first.
Quick.
So motion by Chris to approve the minutes, second by Dan. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Do let me
Motion
make
passes.
an editorial remark, though. I was slated to do something by this meeting. I will confess that I haven't done that, but I suggest you and I, Jen, get together. When is the next Budget Committee meeting?
Oh, good question. I should have that off the top.
I
of
got
my
it
head.
right here. It is May 7th at 1400.
All right.
Thank
Well,
you.
I think, Jen, we probably we should get together before then and prep that little part for the next meeting.
Craig, I did notice that when I reviewed the minutes about 10 minutes prior to this very moment, about 20 minutes, that we'd had that discussion in the last meeting, and I think maybe just for posterity, we could just. I don't think there's any. Like, I think it's fine that we don't have the numbers that we talked about getting. I think maybe we just talk through the sort of strategic conversation we had about that. We've had about recent months.
It will come up. It will come up in this meeting because I don't know if you read the notes that I made on the slides, but there are some parts where it's going to surface in this meeting, and which is why I think it probably is useful to have an exhibit that we actually look at next time. But I'll wait until we get to that part of the meeting before I raise that issue.
Perfect.
Brooke, can you bring up the presentation for us?
Do you want a PowerPoint or is a?
Whichever one is more user friendly for you.
You want that?
Sure. Thank you. No, what was that? Good for me.
What happened just then?
Oh, thank you.
Sorry, we're sharing the presentation. Give us just a second here. Sorry, we're just sharing it to people in the room. We forgot about you. You'll be with us here soon. Okay.
Is that a symbol for some sort of currency, or is that something you just made up?
Bitcoin.
Oh, it's
It came
Bitcoin.
from Craig. It originally came from Craig from like the first presentation he helped us with, and I've always just kept it.
I'm moving to crypto, Roger. There's some great conference sessions
No,
last week on it.
It's a good investment.
You want to answer that, Craig?
Yeah. I'm not a Bitcoin fan, but whatever.
Here,
It's always interesting to look at it.
Yeah.
California guys. Just kidding.
Okay,
Well,
we'll get rolling
I
here.
don't think Jen and I have really talked through how to recite this presentation. It's been a much more stream of consciousness for Jen, but maybe I'll speak to the first slide, Jen, and you can go through the specifics of the.
I think we each worked on, we know which slides we participated on.
Sure.
It'll work out.
You want to take it away then?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, so this is just kind of big picture highlights on financial planning. This is a repeat slide. You know, just talking about lengthening our financial planning horizon. You know, Craig gave the presentation at the retreat. Chris has been, and Molly have been, Mike and like FFKR. Did I say that acronym right?
FFKR.
FFKR, you know, we're doing a lot with capital master planning. And then we just wanted to highlight the wage study and the updates to the Alta Marshal's office for stabilization and the accomplishments we made in the last year and are making currently. So these are some of the really big questions that I have for, and some of the kind of assumptions that I've made in my, you know, this rendition of the budget. We've talked about doing, and the council's kind of given guidance to do truth and taxation roughly every other year. So for now, I have $100,000 property tax increase in the current budget. We have slides later that are gonna talk more about that. So I'll just highlight that and leave it at that for now. We talked about the sales tax projected number for the budget being the status quo of like what it is the current year instead of using the three-year average. So that's where we're at on sales tax projection. And then another big question is the transient room tax and whether we want to think about moving in that direction sooner or whether we want to delay that a year. And I have a slide on that as well later, more detail. One of the things I have done, and this is kind of a outcome of the retreat, is I have budgeted for unrestricted fund balance, $225,000 of cash on hand in my current budget. So that's something new that we haven't done in a bit. And then, Chris, do you want to speak to the Alta Resort shuttle or I guess we're just assuming the same revenue and expenses as we currently have, but we're still working through that quite a bit.
Very much so. I mean, just for the purposes of developing, you know, iterating budget documents, we assume the same program next year, but I think there's a lot of we have a fair amount of uncertainty, more uncertainty than usual over the past couple of years about the shuttle program next year. And do we have more material on the shuttle later?
I don't think we
really
Not
do,
this one,
but
no.
so I guess, you know, Molly, who's been running the shuttle program this year, has been talking to Tom Schneider at length, and you know, as is usual, Alta Shuttle is not super enthusiastic about operating the shuttle program and has some kind of specific points to make about why it's challenging to operate. We are setting up a kind of a shuttle program stakeholder meeting to see if we want to explore some changes for next year. And some of those changes could probably reduce the cost and reduce the level of service that we provide. But you know, who knows where that will go. For now, we're assuming the same revenue and expense for next year.
Brooke, is there a way for you, at least for us, and because I think it blocks it off for the folks that are online to, get rid of that. Thank you. So this is my slide for Roger. I know he loves the pretty charts and graphs. So this, I just want to kind of remind everybody that this is the breakdown of our revenue on the left by category. So you can see sales tax being the major one, off to the right, you know, it accounts for. In FY 26, it would, if we kept it where it is, it would be 44% of our combined fund revenue. And that chart on the right just kind of shows like the increase. Obviously, the blue on the far left is FY 25, and we're only partially through the year. Sales tax is, we're 2 months behind. Typically in receiving sales tax. So, you know, we're, what is it? It's April, so we're just getting like February numbers.
Jim,
So,
when did we apply the final 0.01% or 0.1% resort tax that we had not yet?
that was October of 23.
So that would have been in fiscal 24. Is that right?
I think that sounds right.
Okay. Yeah, well, I just,
Yes, yes, it was in the fall, yes.
the chart on the right is really interesting in so many ways, and I guess my first take is that it's a result of the post-COVID, you know, decimation, community, economy, boom. But that's what caused me to wonder, well, when did we apply that additional that rate increase?
Yeah, because we approved it in the summer and then it was there's like a delay until it becomes effective because they have to post it. There's like a 90-day window though, so it became effective October 1 of 23.
Okay.
I just wanted to do like a really rough sketch of what the property tax increase might look like if we went in that direction with truth and taxation this year. So I mean, there's maybe this page is a little busy, but I think, you know, there's some comparisons on here. I don't yet know what other entities might be proposing currently. We'll know that later in the process if we move down this road. But what I did to kind of generate these numbers is I put an additional 100,000 in the budget. So going from 405 to 505,000 for property tax. And then I used an average of the last 2 years for the valuation and for the total tax amount. So that basically gave me a very rough rate of 0.001260. And so if you were to apply that to $100,000 in value, it would roughly increase someone's property tax bill by $47. Again, this is super preliminary, but it's just to give a sense of the direction we might be moving and hopefully maybe, oops, that might have been me. Oh, is that you?
You know, Jen,
Yeah, ask questions away.
that's $47 per 100K of assessed value. I know it's a factor of 10 and very easy to calculate, but I wonder for the properties in our community, we ought to quote this per $1 million in assessed value. That is 470K per $1 million. I mean,
I can do that.
yeah, I mean, 47 looks, you know, trivially small. 470 doesn't.
Okay. Yeah, I'll do for the next round. I will
Okay. And
provide this as well.
And it's always kind of startling to me to see how much properties in unincorporated Salt Lake are compared to us.
Right.
Yeah, and Brighton.
And Brighton too, yeah.
What's that?
We don't know those numbers.
Oh, no, we do. They're right there.
But it's also,
They don't.
I think it's a statistically small sample as well. So, you know.
True.
Yeah, I think we've been doing mock-ups like this really since the first time I remember doing one was when the town was contemplating joining the Unified Fire Service area.
Yeah.
in the property tax, the total property tax rate on Alta properties that was going to create. And so obviously, there are a lot of ways to choose comparables for this viewpoint, but I think what we're focusing on here is some adjacent municipalities in the valley, which are interesting, but not really, to me, all that relevant. Their economies of scale are so much greater. What to me is more interesting is Brighton and unincorporated Salt Lake County, because they're just in a much more similar context. There's it's a more similar context for obvious reasons. So I mean, and really the comparison is, those folks use unified, well, I don't remember if Brighton's in UPD or Salt Lake County sheriffs, but they are subject to the same law enforcement property tax, which, as you can see, is quite significant. That's higher. It's a bigger levy than any other levy on the entire page. Is that true? No, school districts are higher. Of course.
School districts always going to win.
Those folks get the municipal services that the town provides from Slavisla is the law enforcement tax levy, and the revenue goes to UPD or Salt Lake County Sheriff, and then they get their other municipal services from the municipal services district. In Brighton, their water happens to be generally non-governmental. I think it's all little private water systems. So anyway, at any rate, the alternative to the town of Alta and the services we provide is Salt Lake County Sheriffs, we'll call it, and the municipal services district, and we're cheaper. We're cheaper now, and we'd be cheaper with this possible property tax increase.
Okay, this is the slide to look a little bit at the municipal transient room tax. So we do have the option of imposing a 1% tax. Off to the right there, you can see at the top right, our current the total transient room tax would be 13.92. If we imposed the 1%, it would go to 14.92. For me, there is no exact way with the data that we have to be able to know exactly what amount of revenue that is going to be. So I have to make assumptions. And so I did work with a gentleman at the state to try and take the data that we do have about total sales tax and making some assumptions that like the lodging community would be I think like maybe something like 15%. That number could be spot on or it could be totally off. But I've tried to calculate the number in a couple different types of ways, and I keep coming back to like the roughly $200,000 a year number. So that would be what our added revenue could be, I'll say. And right now I put some comparables down there on the bottom left. Right now, and I just picked a whole bunch, some of the ones that we often compare ourselves to, and some local ones. So if we were to, you can see we're partially way down the list currently, and if we imposed the 1%, would be certainly on the high end with Moab. And again, I don't know if any of these other entities are going to be proposing this tax this year or in the near future. So this is just data as of now.
Okay, so obviously payroll is the biggest chunk of the town budget, sort of lump sum and across departments, or bottom line and across departments. We continue to use the worth of work framework, benchmarking framework that is a the seemingly the most common public sector compensation benchmarking tool. Nearly every public entity in the state participates in it. We use that framework to assess essentially the market for job titles in the town of Alta payroll. So we are proceeding to add a fifth cop. I think we're on track to do that by the end of the fiscal year. We have assumed a cost of living increase of 2.5%. That's the Social Security cost of living increase for this year, and it's seemingly the most common COLA, which takes into account some innumerable amount of economic data. We've followed up on the conversation the budget committee had about where to go with bonuses and performance and merit updates, and we at this point are heading in the direction that the budget committee identified last year. We have a sort of a draft wage plan, and it mostly applies a COLA. We have a couple of cases the high level strategy I'd like to have the town adhere to with compensation is to try to always pay a COLA and always have room in the budget for performance and merit increases as necessary. For this year we're looking at doing less of that than we have in the past, partially due to the amount of payroll across the board payroll adjustment that has occurred. But there are a couple of job titles and individuals who aren't at the appropriate point in the range, let's say, and that's part of our strategy as well. Establish an appropriate range so that we're competitive and compensating fairly, and then try to keep people at the appropriate position in the range based on time and position and performance. We're looking at we'd like to propose increases in the compensation we provide to town council members, the treasurer, and the planning commission. Those numbers have been flat for at least going on 11 years that I've been at the town. The burdens of being a council member well, I don't know if it's really fair to say they've increased, but being a town council member takes a lot of time, a lot of emotional bandwidth, and I think it's reasonable to think of that as kind of a barrier to entry for folks who might otherwise be interested. And I think it's only fair to consider that. So anyways, that's that. We've been trying to assume in our budget planning that the cost to contract with outside vendors or consultants or whomever we pay that's not on the payroll goes up by a set amount annually. So we've sort of baked that into the budget. We're proposing a $150,000 transfer to the capital project fund from the general fund for next year. It's not just a placeholder, but it's a budget assumption. It may be a strategic target going forward, something like 5% of the total general fund budget. We don't have any information about a potential Our Lady of the Snows purchase baked into the draft fiscal year 26 budget documents we've worked out, but we do have a fair amount of material to cover later in this slide deck about that. So here's a look at the pay plan that sort of results from the wage study update that Jen did. What the way it works is as we approach the budget process, Jen sort of painstakingly updates the input data from our, we have a pretty substantial range of data with job titles in the entities that we choose the entities that we want to compare ourselves against We've reviewed that in recent meetings. And then we find job titles that are simply, the same or similar to the job titles on our payroll. Jen takes the compensation levels input in the TechNet framework and then plugs all that into our system, and it spits out these pay ranges for our job titles on the right. On the left then is where the job titles fall within the minimum, midpoint, and maximum for the data. So you can see that for the most part, everybody's in the range. There's one position that is not quite in the range, but very close. So I think this is no small feat for the town to establish this framework in the first place. It's it's really still pretty new. And for the council to support the revenue increases that were required to get us here was a really big step that we're grateful for.
Yep. I've forgotten who's the creator of this chart on the left. It has a name, a guy.
Mike
Mike
Swallow.
Swallow.
Who?
Mike Swallow.
Swallow. Yeah,
He's-
right.
Yeah,
Yep.
either in the company, what's the company, TechNet
TechNet,
or
yeah.
something, yeah, and so
Yeah,
he's just sort of
technology. Yeah.
it's his brainchild, but it's a company that he started and to some extent runs. I think.
Yeah, and there's he's trying to bring someone else in that in the next couple of years we'll probably start working more with.
So he did.
But no, he really enjoys it. He's great to work with. I really enjoy working with him, and just how he approaches it. He's been very helpful. So,
Can I just
Yeah.
actually, I just wanna, can
Go
you go
back.
back to that?
You
And it doesn't even necessarily bring up the topic of the agencies we've chosen for our comparables, but I know we had some, we've had a lot of dialogue over the past couple months about, what is our market and who do we wanna be able to compete against, and I just wanna, it occurred to me in reviewing the list of comparables that we previously had Park City Municipal in our data set. I believe we decided to remove them because Park City pays a lot. And it just felt to me like it skewed the data. So that
right, so we focus more on places
Salt Lake
that were the
Valley.
same size and where our folks were
Yeah,
living, so
so-
like the base of the valley, right?
right, our comparables are like Salt Lake, Wasatch Front metro area, public entities, municipalities mostly. The Valley Emergency Communication Center dispatch positions, and then some resort communities or sort of gateway communities elsewhere in the state.
And I know Elise had suggested that we look to see if Brighton's data is in there, and I don't know if they have yet.
They've only got one FTE, so
Yeah.
I mean, it would be that would, but it's a clerk. I mean, it would certainly be interesting to know.
Well, and even if it wasn't plugged in, we could still pull the data.
Yeah.
Even just know what it is, so.
Do you want to talk? Why don't you talk?
So here is a by department look. This is a comparison of the FY 25 versus our draft 26 wages. Just going back to the conversation about bonuses and how Chris says baking them in for the future. The bonus amounts are included so that we have a like for like between FY 26 and FY 25. And so, I mean, I think the big picture is that, at the end of the day, we're talking about, and again, this includes wages and overtime. So this is budgeting. This isn't necessarily base wages. Just want to make that clear. It does not include other benefits. So 163,000 increase. Of that 163, 108,000 is for the fifth officer, and again, that includes base wages and potential overtime. That leaves 54,000 for the remaining staff. Questions?
let me suggest that over time we retire the term bonus, because we're really
That's
moving,
exactly what, yeah.
we're moving from a situation where we were paying bonuses, and now we're wrapping that into the salaries, and it no longer will be the traditional budget, traditional term for budget. For bonus, damn it.
Any other comments?
Just one, which we have I don't know if our staffing model for like the marshal's office, which has sort of unusual, uh, overtime pay, but overtime pay because of the way that we actually allow people to work. Has that been, is that different than the way that most other marshal's offices are staffed in terms of the hours they work and that kind of stuff? And do we feel like that's been a significant attractor of people to our, to work in the Alta marshal's office?
So are you asking about their scheduled shift time per week? I
Yeah.
guess I'm thinking you're leaning into, and I'm gonna ask Mike to help me out here in a second, but yeah, I mean, our officers are scheduled for 48 hours in a week. 40 of which
Yep.
is paid at regular time and 8 at overtime.
Yeah.
Mike, do you want to speak to how you think that compares to other agencies and whether it is attractive?
Yeah, so as you look at these numbers, of a deputy marshal potential earnings annually, those are comparable, really to a Salt Lake County officer's annual earnings without overtime. So in other words, we have to pay overtime to achieve that level. Because of the limited number of personnel that we have on staff, we work a longer shift. That is attractive to most of our applicants because they get more time off during the week, a few more days off. So, I think it's our position that, you have to work a few more hours a week to get to that competitive salary, but there's a benefit that, potentially outweighs that.
Yeah.
Mike, wouldn't you also say though that like, I mean, it's attractive to the people who, well, wouldn't you say that it's also kind of a limiter? I mean, not everybody, not every potential lateral transfer or, new law enforcement professional can spend 24 hours at a time or more in Alta, right?
Yeah, I think that's also true, Chris. Thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, so it's a matter of necessity if we want 24-hour coverage, which I recommend we maintain. It's just the way the towns worked, and to not have 24-hour shifts, like, yeah, we'd have to hire like another 3 or 4 cops, right, Mike? So
Yes.
yeah, I mean, it's a double-edged sword, I think, in terms of
Yeah, I think what you're saying is that it narrows the pool of applicants, but it increases the stickiness of their retention because of the time off. And it's, it doesn't work for everybody, but for the people it works for, it's probably a significant attractor. Part of the reason that I raised it is similar to the point that Roger was making about, not using the bonus word again. Similarly here, the overtime is actually a result of our scheduled shifts. So when I hear the word overtime, the image that it gives me is, stuff that we didn't anticipate and they had to work longer. In this particular case, it's not. So just think about the verbiage, because I think it sends the wrong kind of a message. And I do think that the way that we've got it scheduled makes a hell of a lot of sense and gives us, some unique kind of opportunities for the right kind of employee.
So Craig, so when we're doing when we're looking at annual wages for our officers, we look at their, again, that 48-hour work week, and the way we've been framing it in the office is that they have 40 hours at regular time, and then they have 8 hours of scheduled overtime. And then in addition to that, for budgeting purposes, I have another buffer for overtime on top of that for the department.
Yeah, Jen, I know you did the
That-
calculations correctly.
Oh,
I'm just talking about it. Remember, I'm always sensitive to how does it appear to people that don't know all the detail. And really, I think the only thing I'm suggesting is that instead of saying like where it says fifth officer wages and overtime, it's actually fifth officer wages and scheduled overtime, I think.
no, it's fifth officer scheduled overtime and overtime.
Yeah, I mean, because
Okay.
there's scheduled overtime, and then there's all the overtime that, given our staffing levels and,
Yeah.
sort
All
of
right.
portfolio specialties, like, for instance, when we have a case that takes a high profile case that takes all winter to administer, Mike has to call our deputies in beyond their scheduled overtime.
I got
just
it.
to, you know what I mean? So, and all police agencies do this. I mean, it's an overtime and thus cost intensive service, right?
I mean, I can update this slide to say scheduled overtime and overtime if you think that helps in
It's
any
really
way.
it's really just for going forward. It's this slide's fine. We know the detail.
I mean, this is a nomenclature issue, not a financial issue, okay?
That's right.
Correct, yeah.
Nomenclature issue with financial implications, yeah.
Yeah.
Picking, so.
Yeah.
Capital projects, okay, so, we talked through this at length, we talked through part of this at length, in, last month's meeting. Some of the highlights for, projects we wanna do next year are just a couple more tasks to try to, get us in a position to decide, if, when, and how to replace a building. So, a few of those things are as built surveys or kind of a civil study, in-depth civil study of the land we own. Geotech analysis of those properties, the town probably did some kind of geotechnical analysis for the town office building, that's I'm sure in the file, but who knows what occurred, when the town built the building we're sitting in right now, and yeah, I don't know if they did geotech analysis in 1955 when they dropped out the central on the site up there, so anyways, that is great, due diligence just for us to have on file that will support any decision we make. And then some massing studies, we've got some really, we reviewed kind of a draft work product from FFKR in our facilities planning project on, I believe it was Tuesday of this week, kind of blending together. So we have a extremely high level sort of alternative study of, new facility functional space concepts, and that entails some massing. So anyways, we do actually have a proposal from an engineer who was going to provide civil study and geotech services as part of the FFKR work on hand to sort of base a budget number on, and it's actually it's about half of $25,000, but that's the number we have in the capital plan for now. We've had for fiscal 26 for facilities planning phase 2, we've actually had 75 in the budget for the past couple of years. So a fair amount of that was for avalanche studies, and we talked about this last time. I don't think we want to spend the money on avalanche studies at this point. I think we want to proceed with our well-educated assumptions about which sites are more exposed than others for the time being. Like we discussed in the April council meeting, I'd really like to figure out how to decide what building we want to replace first during the next fiscal year, and Nate Henry and FFKR have some recommendations just for how to structure that conversation that we can talk about maybe in the May council meeting or maybe in the June council meeting. For Tom Mortola, that thing, you know, it's like a ghost in our capital planning outlook. The structure is nearly melted out, so we're gonna be able to get the FFKR team that's gonna do the historic structure report up here in the next couple of weeks. And that is gonna be the foundation for a recommendation of what to finally do with that. I don't see a reason to change the $25,000 that we have in capital budget to do some work to mitigate the further deterioration of that historic asset. It is presumably gonna cost more than that. However, we may have an opportunity to get some state funding through working with the Salt Lake County Historic Preservation Committee to get a grant for that. So anyways, that's still in there. And I hope that by the time I'm done working at the town, it's not anymore. We've got a couple of projects that are similarly kind of they also feel like placeholders on the capital projects plan related to Alta Marshall's office technology investments, security cameras. We didn't get them done this year.
Well, it's not that we didn't get them done, it's that we've had issues.
Oh yeah, no, I don't mean, that's
with
not
Yeah,
we would have gotten them done, except for that the vendor we've engaged to do the first phase of those is not. The implementation of the first phase has not gone super well, and it's impeded our ability to roll out phase two.
yeah, I
And
mean,
then-
there's been some just really weird technology things that have happened that like we just can't figure out. I mean, Mike can
Yeah.
speak more
Oh, yeah.
eloquently to it, but
Mike, if you want to say anything about that, I don't know what it would do to your blood pressure, but
I think you guys summed it up accurately. You know, we're trying to overcome some technical challenges and, you know, quite possibly looking at abandoning this vendor.
And then we need to be in a kind of ready posture to update our dispatch console, which just depends on the Valley Emergency Communications Center's decision to update their computer aided dispatch system. Or, you know, ours has to play with, or we'd like ours to play with theirs, I think is the way to put that. Is that accurate, Mike?
It is. You know, right now we're functionally interoperable with the 911 center in the way that we manually hand over calls. There is some legislation that talks about that. You know, so far we're good to go to operate in the way that we have historically done, but we want to stay poised to adapt if need be. I think as VEC has transitioned this year to a new vendor and a new console system of their own, we're learning a lot about how, you know, legacy radio systems interact with it. So, I mean, this is still a decision that is going to take some thought and some time.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Our Lady of the Snows, see below. Not below, see, you know,
next slide.
follow-up slides, so. Yeah, for you know, water and sewer, you know, we're focused, I think relatively locked in, fairly well locked in on the water line project. We've got Newman on board, we've got the materials on order. We had a little bit of a kickoff and coordination meeting the other day. Where the Newman project manager and the Alta ski area project manager got to talk about how that project's gonna roll out, so. I'm feeling really good about it. You know, a note of interest is that it sounds like excavation for that might not actually start until like late June or something like that. So. Anyways, it's not necessarily relevant to the budget. We amended the budget in March to show $400,000 of expenses on the project in fiscal 25. We think that a reasonable cost estimate for the total project is $650,000. That's based on the cost per foot offer the ski area has made for their share of the project, which is most of the labor, and then the contract value with Newman. So anyway, we'll have to talk more about general fund loans to the water fund to keep money in the water fund over the next couple of months. And then the remote meter project, you know, I think we've think that the gist of that, Jen, if I'm not mistaken, is that we've essentially done the installs that the service area can do, most of them on the residential properties.
Yep.
And many of the meters that remain to be upgraded are ones that require hiring a plumber and are kind of like special one-off. They're unique plumbing scenarios, I guess.
Yeah, so we have, we've been working with the lodges to try and schedule their change outs here this spring. So the lodges should get done in FY 25. And then that really does leave kind of like the problem children where it just gets a lot more complicated and there's a lot more thought behind it. So yeah, we just need to roll over, hopefully one more year, we can get through most of those and their complex situations.
When you say roll over one more year, do you mean?
We're gonna take,
expect
the
these to
total
be,
project cost is the same.
yeah,
We're not spending it all of this year, and so we're just taking some of the remaining balance and we're pushing it forward to FY 26.
okay, got it. But by the end of FY 26, you expect 100% remote read meters, correct?
I'll say 90%. There's gonna be a couple, that are gonna be super complicated, and I have a feeling we're not gonna be able to figure out next year,
Yeah.
to be honest, but hopefully that's a couple. And that the other ones we can get through.
It's a really important project that I think's like fallen off the dashboard a little bit as we've talked about bigger and more expensive components of our infrastructure, but. We've steadily been using more drinking water over the past 10 years. We've been looking over some data in the context of the Albion Day Lodge building permit review. And we're using we're using more water than we did 10 years ago. And so hopefully this, once we have remote read meters that can give us real-time information across the system, we can just have another data frame to understand our water consumption on the Bay City Tunnel water system.
Right, I mean, you could have an interesting correlation between, sales tax, meaning there's more people
Yeah,
here,
There's
right?
more flushes,
And more use of water,
Flushes, yeah.
showers.
yeah.
All right, so this is a big slide.
I know.
In so many ways. This is the spreadsheet on the right is this is essentially the approved capital projects fund plan with a couple of key updates. To work down the x-axis. The first change is that we have a new number in the replace a building line item, fiscal year 28, $9 million for a new building. That is the midpoint between the range of new facility replacement costs that we reviewed with FFKR a couple of days ago. So there's more to say about that. There's a lot more to say about that. The number in that column previously was $7.5 million. The range, just to talk a little bit more about it, the range that FFKR has sort of worked up is 6 to 12. And there's a ton more to say about that, super preliminary, but so anyways, 9 is the midpoint there. 7.5 is still in that range. Anyways, I'll leave it at that. And without further ado, the other changes to this capital projects plan version, which is not approved, is purchase of Our Lady of the Snows. So, I'll go to the left of the slide. The anticipated purchase price of Our Lady of the Snows, if the town proceeds with that transaction, is $1 million. That is what the town was able to negotiate with the Catholic diocese for the purchase of the building. So we assume $50,000 in closing costs and $100,000 in repairs, in the first couple of years of ownership. The town does eventually own the building. So that brings the total, projected capital spend based solely on the projects we know we want to do over the next few years to $10,761,248. And that is if the town buys our Lady of the Snows, and we've got, you know, a couple versions of this. One is with the purchase and one is without, and then we've got some. The next slide, Jen is going to talk to capital fund balance projections.
Yeah, so on this is kind of like the addition for the projections that is, I have it just down below in my Excel sheet. So it's not something that I've shown, but it's something we kind of worked up. And I think that this is fairly similar to, I know JB's been working up some numbers as well. So I just wanted to kind of go through how this works. We have a beginning balance. The transfers that happen from the general fund to the capital projects plan, those are done after year end. So when we're talking about projected cash balances, it's basically, we're always a year behind, I guess. So the 522,000, that was basically the amount that we needed to transfer as of the numbers that were tallied by Steve Rowley for June 30th of 2024 didn't happen until like October. So we have to include that 522,000 in fiscal year 25 if we want, because that's the year that the money is coming in. I have a line on there for loans or bonds, you know, that's just talking about, and we have the question mark out there in FY 28 because we anticipate doing some sort of we'll have to figure out how we're going to pay for that $9 million building. I have some interest that will be coming into the account, and then we just have the total of the projects. So that's how those numbers are generated, and you can see where we go into the negative in FY 28. But that is how we get to the numbers that are on the top where it says fund balance. Those numbers up there, up high, underneath the fiscal year, are being generated from this information down here.
Okay.
Craig, any questions? Okay,
You
we'll
can-
move on.
I have to unmute, sorry. No, yes, I have a number of comments and I'll try to make them short. One, I think we should think about doing a bond sooner rather than later. And the reason that I say that, and Jen, I don't know, I know we haven't collected all the sales tax, so we haven't closed out our numbers yet. But are you projecting that we're actually going to hit our revenue budget, or do you think we're going to be short of it, you know, sort of somewhat as evidenced by Mike Mon's comments that he expects his revenue to be down 4% or so this year?
I expect we'll hit it. I think we're on track.
Interesting.
Did he actually say that? I thought he said it was going to be the third best year of business ever.
Well,
Yeah.
he said a couple meetings, he said 4% and 5%, but then they were up. So I think it was just different points in the year. They were at a different place.
I see.
So
All right.
in general, I think the outcome for us and you know, and when he said those numbers that we were pretty closely tracking with what he was saying. But what I'm seeing for the numbers that are coming in as of late, we should be just fine.
Good. That's great. That's better news than I expected. That said, and I'm going back to my comment about the bond, is you know, in one scenario, what's happened is we had a demographic and a shift around COVID. You know, a lot of people moved here. I think more that demographic is leaning into outdoor stuff. And we had, you know, some rapid increases in income. The concern that I had is that period is over and that our financials are not going to look quite as good going forward. That would be particularly true if what happened is the cost side sort of lagged the increase in the income. And to some degree, we're seeing that with the catch up on the wages and things like that. So I'm not really predicting that our that our income and balance sheet may be looking less robust in the future, but I am concerned about it. And because of that, seeking a bond when our numbers look so good would be, better for us maybe than seeking it in a couple of years' time. So that's just one thought for people to think about, not to resolve today. The second comment that I had, and Jen, it was a comment, that it's why I said that I do think we need to prepare an exhibit to really understand our financial health. And that's what I committed to do for this meeting, and then didn't do it. So I think we need it for next time. And what I want to do is call out the difference between the enterprise funds and the government funds. Nomenclature that is, I find, peculiar and not particularly helpful. But the idea is that the water fund and the sewer fund are meant to be standalone, quote, like businesses, where the taxes for, the water taxes and the sewer taxes pay for both the operational and the capital costs of that particular service. That's different than the general fund. And in the general fund, what we do is we have capital as separate from our operational budget. But to look at our real financial health, we actually need to look at what's in the operating fund as well. It's why during the financial presentation at the beginning of the year, I talked about maybe we start draining some of the excess capital or some of the excess cash we have in that fund and put it in this dedicated capital fund. So I think to really get a handle on what our financial situation is in the government fund with projected future expenditures in the government fund, we have to look at the operational, how much cash do we have left over in that fund? What is our projected working capital for next year? And what buffer do we want to have, because the variance in the revenue in the water fund and in the sewer fund is way less than it is in the general fund. And really, that's a long way of saying just looking at what's in the capital fund, I don't think is sufficient to understand our financial health around, long-term planning. All right.
Certainly not. No, that I appreciate that comment, and certainly not this. Yeah, I mean, I have similar mock-ups for all of the other funds as well. We just didn't put those necessarily in this presentation. And I would look forward to working with you on that.
Yeah.
So I think the key point on this slide, or one of the many important points on this slide is that, anticipate if we roll out the capital projects plan as currently constituted, the fund balance would drop to about $500,000, $498,678. If in fiscal year 26 at the end of the year, if we execute the capital plan and buy OLS.
Yeah.
Right, Jim?
Yeah, and with those other assumptions being, the 150,000 transfer and all of the other various inputs.
But that's exactly my point, Chris and Jen, which is the capital fund is going to be a function of how much money we transfer, which frankly is why looking at looking at the cash balance in the general fund is so critical to understanding the health.
Thanks, Greg.
There.
No, I think you want to, yeah. Okay, so this is another way to look at the capital projects fund. No OLS purchase on this version. Still got 9 million for a new building in fiscal year 28. It occurred to me, with a project of that magnitude, you know, potentially take 12 months or longer, we would. I don't know if it makes sense to put the entire cost in one fiscal year.
Probably not.
Probably not, but you know, it's a projection at this point with so many more decisions and milestones to process. So anyways, yeah, you know, the difference in the total cash outlay for projects we actually have on the horizon is the purchase price, closing costs, and initial repairs of OLS, and that amounts to 12%. You know, it will cost us 12% more for the entire capital plan over, you know, the 4 years that we have projects programmed out. If we do purchase OLS, and this is a vast generalization, right? There's so much more to think about. It really has more to do, to me, there are a lot more variables in what we're gonna do for facility replacement, how we're gonna cover that cost. I mean, one of those variables is you know, is debt service, and you know, what are the borrowing costs, and that's gonna depend on so many factors, such as what kind of revenue do we bond against. So that's just one thought that crossed my mind. This is a generalization in so many ways. There are obviously many other capital needs that will surface, regardless of which buildings we own over the next few years. We can talk about that a little bit more. Next slide.
Before you leave that slide, I look at this in the following way, that if we buy OLS, we're 8 million in the hole in fiscal 28. If we don't buy OLS, we're 7 million in the hole in fiscal 28. So there's $1 million difference in how far we're in the hole, but that $1 million is out of 7 or 8 million, which is you know, 12% or so.
Yep.
Craig translated that difference into the size of the building we would be able to buy in 28, and I've forgotten how you did that, but it's I mean, I recognize $1 million is a big number, but in the context of it being $1 million out of 7 or 8 million, it's a significantly smaller percentage.
Yeah, I mean, all I did, Roger, was take the average building cost in Alta and say, okay, at the low end, it's $1,000 a square foot, although I think Chris would tell me it's more like $1,500 per square foot now. But you
It's a
know,
low end, but yeah.
yeah. So, but even at the low end, you're talking about 1,000 square foot difference, and that's why. And I think we're buying more square footage than that, you know, with the new building. But you're also hitting on why I think taking a look at doing the bond issuance sooner rather than later. And Chris, I think it would be wise to think about having literally a half day in-person budget committee meeting, you know, at the end of the summer or this fall or something like that, because I believe you very much when I think your goal of let's decide what building we're going to do next year or over the next, you know, which one are we going to do first? That's going to require a lot of time. And if we just do it in normal budget committees, we're going to have another 4 before we do that. And I really urge us to get ahead of that. And it's inextricably tied, I believe, to the bond issuance and things like that. So I just think there's a lot of detail, and we're going to have to do our homework. And I would prefer that we'd schedule a long meeting to do that. Again, I think we should get it done at the end of the summer or early fall, because it then sets a stage for any tax increases or whatever else we're going to do. And I just think it's really important.
Can I add something to that? I agree with you, Craig. In addition to that, what's been floated once already by Chris, and I think works in tandem and is absolutely essential as well, would be an additional retreat with the entire staff, town council, and the public as we talk about, those two things have to work hand in hand, the budget and what is that future look like? Because the landscape looks very different if the town purchases OLS and that becomes the default community center for the entire town. Because I suspect, and I believe myself personally, that will directly affect what that replacement building looks like. And so it might even reduce that square footage requirement by, say, a comparable amount, 2,000 square feet or something. And what's that do to the budget for a replacement building? But we have to talk about that both publicly and as a staff and a town council. And I think we have to do both. And while I relish the opportunity to spend a lot more time, all of us together in long meetings, we got to do it. We're at a point with the town as we're trying to build for the future that we have to do those things. And the time is now. And some of it's been forced upon us by this opportunity that, if I may, fell out of heaven. And so we'll see what happens with that as we know more. And I think I really like your thoughts and what you're talking about with regard to bonding on the heels of what you had brought up in January. And I think sooner is better than later, because the longer we drag out whatever the replacement building plan is, the more expensive it will become. And so anyway, those are my thoughts. I know, Chris, you floated that out as a retreat, and I really support that for everybody and the community, especially at that point. We'll know if we have OLS or the town doesn't have OLS, and we can move appropriately. Either way, it's this summer. Sorry, that's 2 cents.
No worries.
Before I move on from this slide, I do want to call out a typo. I must have fat fingered there. Left side, I have a 6 instead of a 9 at the beginning of the total capital spend there. So I'll fix that when I post this online.
Didn't notice it.
When did you type that keystroke? Was it 8:30
Right.
All right, so many unstated assumptions and details and variables to work through on our capital outlook. I'm proud of the progress we've made, with the council's support, Craig's input, over the past couple of years on capital planning. So for facilities planning, we met with Nate from FFKR a couple of days ago to review the draft outcomes of their sort of space planning work. Really interesting, really cool work product. I look forward to sharing with the council. Basically what they're going to amount to is a couple different ways to arrange existing Town of Alta program areas, square footage, and uses, and functional space that we identified in working with FFKR back in the fall to kind of optimize our services. And as we are all aware, a lot of that comes from additional needs from the marshal's office for space for things like interview rooms, evidence storage, armory, training space, and so on and so forth. We're going to look at 2 space plan alternatives. They're focused on this site up here at the firehouse. There are several reasons why. One is that the firehouse has the most critical deficiencies. It's got major structural issues. And the others that are top of mind for me is that it's much more accessible than our other sites. I slipped and fell on my rear end last night coming out of the office building, and I'm glad I had a soft landing because I've got low bone density, and I don't want to break my pelvis working for the town. And the other is that it is Known to be less exposed to avalanches up here, and that just has a huge impact on construction costs. And, you know, has all sorts of other implications for owning and operating facilities in Alta. So anyways, the space plan alternatives are gonna focus on this site. The range of costs for the new building, I already kind of cracked that open. 6.2 million is actually the low end. And that is to essentially replace the programming that we have in this building currently, most of it. And all of the programming that we have in Alta Central, all the functional space and square footage that we have over there. So that would be if we essentially took all that stuff and rebuilt it on this site. The high end cost of 12.5 million is to replace all that stuff and all the functional space we identified in our work with FKR earlier in the project. It also includes some renovations to our other buildings, including the town office. Most of those are about accessibility. So anyways, that's our range of costs, and there's a ton to chew on there. We've talked a bit about that, you know, we have the facility and condition assessment. That was the first phase of the work we're doing with FFKR. The council's reviewed that. It obviously highlights so many deficiencies with our existing buildings. That is a guide for continued ownership and maintenance of the buildings we have now. And you know, partially my thinking in doing the project the way we did it to start with that was that I thought we needed to justify a decision to tear down and rebuild a building and spend all this money by, you know, fully enumerating in daylight the deficiencies in our facilities. Those assumptions maybe were foregone enough so that we didn't, you know, to not necessitate that work. However, you know, there are so many more milestones to crest in order to raise money and make the decision to build a building, and there's a, you know, a better than decent chance that we continue to operate one or both of these, you know, two you know, past end of life facilities. So it's a great document to have in hand if we're going to wind up in a position to continue operating Alta Central and this building. For the time being, though, I don't recommend we really dig into it substantially. All we have programmed in the budget document this year are minor kind of functional and life safety upgrades to these two buildings. Things like really modest improvements to the electrical system. We want to install ground, you know, GFI outlets, change the lighting to LED. That'll, you know, save us costs in the short term. Some of the doors at Alta Central barely function. We want to replace those. We are trying to figure out kind of a budget level cost estimate for a seismic upgrade to Alta Central. I know John Byrne had you know, found that to be a highlighted facility condition assessment. I don't know what it's going to cost and if it's going to make sense to do a project if we continue to move towards, you know, potentially moving public safety functions or critical services out of Alta Central into a new building in the next 5 years or something. But we'll just have to see what we come back with for a cost estimate. So Molly's gonna work with some engineers on that. That is the general fund, you know, capital outlook, or really just a modest snapshot of it. You know, there's just so much more on the horizon for us to try to keep tabs on. And I think Craig was right to tie the capital projects fund transfer to the topic of how much money we keep in the general fund. I think that's exactly right. We can save for capital projects to the extent that you know, we are operating in the black, basically. You know, we're taking a big step hiring a fifth cop. You know, is our staff going to grow in the future? We don't know. We talk about the need to hire another person to provide you know, support for our buildings. We're going to need a sewer operator sooner or later. We were sort of constantly talking about ways to cobble together a full-time employee to do what are really pretty disparate tasks for the town, and that's you know, it's gonna be a big investment if we ever figure that out, and it's hard to even contemplate what the job description looks like, but anyways, you know, will the staff grow? Wage pressures will presumably continue to increase, cost of living in our, you know, job market is increasing. Public safety job market is nuts, but highly competitive, and we've got retirements on the horizon. I mean, we've got 3 of our 4 current deputies are likely gonna retire in the next like 5 or so years. The capital, the water and sewer programs, we've only begun to scratch the surface on what it's gonna take to, you know, support those utilities into the future, and I hope to have more to discuss on that in the next 2 months. You know, we've talked about policing. Not only do you need police officers, but you need equipment and all the administrative backend stuff, and that's a huge burden. Additional services. I don't even really want to talk about additional things that the town can do, because you know, we're still kind of digging out from a past of austerity. And you know, we've talked a lot about how we're gonna pay for you know, growth in operating expenses and capital improvements. You know, we outlined a few potential options in the retreat. We're talking about the general fund balance and whether we can kind of carve out of that on a, you know, what would really be a one-time basis, I think, is the way I think about it. Yeah, Craig, I appreciate your energy and your forward thinking about borrowing. And we can talk more about that in the future. One thing that occurred to me when Craig was saying that is that, you know, we may not, it may not really be worth our time to get too much deeper into that without like getting a bond agent, which we're, I believe, legally required to do as a municipality in order to issue a bond. And that individual would provide us guidance on how to think about all that stuff. So anyways, we can talk about that. Economic development, you know, revenue is gonna increase simply because there's more, you know, taxable activity or taxable property here in Alta, maybe, but you know, opportunities for that are more limited here than in most other, in a lot of other communities. And then of course we can increase taxes, but we really, you know, we are now talking about the last remaining sales tax increase that is available to the town. And it's, you know, generated a nice amount of revenue, but not a ton of revenue. It's really not a paradigm shift. You know, I continue to feel that property taxpayers get a really good deal for the town of Alta and the services we provide, but you know, we don't take the topic of raising property taxes lightly, and if we issue a general obligation bond, which would be paid off by property taxpayers, that will really affect the window of opportunity to you know, increase property tax rates for operating, which is the most stable source of revenue for municipal operations. So some huge choices there for the town to make. This is Jim.
We can skip over this slide pretty quickly. I think, you know, we just in the town office, you know, with the uncertainty of the future of what's gonna happen with Our Lady of the Snows. You know, do I think that this budget off to the right is basically what this assumes is if the town owned the facility and managed it. I don't think we're necessarily moving in that direction right now, so I'd rather not really speak too much about this, but you know, this is just kind of to show that we had spent some time trying to understand how that would affect our general fund budget.
It's a good placeholder, Jen. I agree. I don't think we spent a lot of time on it post decision based on realities or not.
Yeah.
It's a good placeholder though, because
if we need to rely on it. Yeah, if we need to rely on it, it's there, but I don't necessarily think this is gonna be the direction we're gonna go, so. We talked a little bit about water fund rates at the last meeting. I didn't have sewer fund rates, but I do now, so I'll quickly move through these, but basically we are proposing a 10% rate increase for our customers. that would mean that for a single family residence, your bill is gonna increase by about $17. So from 135 to 152 per month, and we are billing monthly now, so figure those are the numbers people want to see or that are most important. We, in the water fund, I guess the other highlights are just, Chris already has talked about the capital projects and, with this rate increase, we have a smaller contribution than normal to our infrastructure replacement, which is basically our savings account. So that's only 6,000 in this current year's budget, and that's just because of the huge project that we're working on. There's no, it just doesn't necessarily make sense to raise the rates even more than 10% just to be able to put that money away when we're talking about all these other sort of funding needs and stuff like that. So I kept that number pretty low just to have a goal of keeping the rate increase at about 10%. So we were able to get there with that. This is a slide that just kind of shows how rates are developed, what your total required sales are, and how we do the math to get there. So, we'll go on. Sewer fund's a little different, a bigger rate increase here, per month for a single family home from 103 to 124. One of the main, there's two big reasons for that. One is that the sewer fund really, there wasn't a rate increase there was probably like a 10-year stint or something where there was no rate increases. And then just a couple of years ago, we started increasing the rates to start saving money for some of these bigger projects that we're gonna have to do here in the future, replacement costs. The rate was already at 20%, so I really, I only have 6,000 in there for infrastructure replacement this year. Just to keep that rate increase down, but we should be saving something. The other big thing is that we put in $30,000 for engineering and planning for future projects, so starting to try and get us closer to actually doing those replacements. And then this is just the sewer rate summary slide. That's the end of our presentation. I should have done a slide of like what's next or what do we need from the budget committee, but we didn't get there. I guess, my questions for this committee really revolve around like, are we moving in the right direction with continuing to discuss the option of the property tax increase? Do we want to continue talking about transient room tax, or do we want to make a decision to recommend we wait on that? Those are kind of two of the bigger questions I have, and would love to get some feedback from the committee.
Can I say a few things?
Yes, and then after that, I do want to say that I'm hoping that we can open this up. John Byrne, I think, has some comments to make, but I wanted to get the budget committee agenda completed and then hopefully respond to him or allow him to make his comments, just as a heads up to everybody.
Well, some things that I'm thinking about is the town population is essentially stable. And I doubt that it'll change much. The COVID effect factor that was mentioned, I think by Chris, is an interesting one, and I don't know if we're all the way through that or not. And ALS's business is, I would say, fairly stable. I mean, there are these small changes from year to year, but for my understanding of what Mike has to say each month, they've got the number of skiers now they're comfortable with, and they'd kind of like to keep it that way. So in some, standing back and looking at this, it appears that the revenue sources are about the same and is going to be so for a few years in the future. the second thought I had is this. In California in the late 70s, there was a huge backlash against increasing property taxes, which were tied to increasing values. And that led to a property tax revolt, which was called Proposition 13. And Proposition 13 almost froze property taxes unless you sold your home. And it
Sorry, let's what, Roger?
Sold your home.
Sold your home, okay.
sold your home, yeah. And allowed people to keep living in their homes because they were getting taxed out of them. We haven't seen that yet, and I use yet in our greater community, but it's something to be cautious of, that we do not want to trigger some sort of property tax revolt. It resulted in, while it allowed people to continue to live where they were, it underfunded community services significantly, and that has been something that California's had to deal with ever since. The third thing I wanted to say, well, I don't have answers to this stuff. I just think it's stuff to think about. A third thing is, with these remote read meters, I wonder if we should consider consumption-based billing for water. I mean, right now it's just based on ECUs, I think, not how much you use.
No, there's an overage. There's a base amount and then there's an overage calculation.
There's
If you
a
go over
binary
this.
trigger.
Say again, Greg, it's a binary what?
It's a single trigger. You have a base amount and then above it you have a different rate. If you want to
Okay.
get more sophisticated, which we could do with the type of metering, is instead of just having a binary trigger, you'd have more of a curve.
Ah,
And the
Tiers,
reason,
stately tiers.
yeah, and the reason we like that Alta has not, my understanding from previous staff, that we didn't really go down that road is because the seasonality of our community and trying to keep, a lot of our homes are empty for a big portion of the year. And trying to keep that base at a level that allows us to pay for the operations of the water fund.
okay.
So, I mean, we could still do that with a more tiered system. It would just be a lot more complicated and.
Okay, well, put that in the bin of crackpot ideas from Roger.
Oh, you're not the
Well-
only one that suggested it.
Yeah, but I
We
think
looked at it quite a bit with Harris when he was the mayor.
I think on the commercial side, that might be something that we have to think about. I mean, my understanding is the increase in the occasional visitor stuff has caused Alta ski lifts to go over essentially their allocated amount of water use. And that's going to come out of the town at some point. So
Yeah.
I just think we have to take a careful look at that, because I, as a homeowner, would be sort of upset, and that's a gross understatement, if I had to cut back my water use because occasional visitors were coming up and using it at Alta ski lifts.
Me too, as a homeowner. Okay,
I don't think we're that close yet, but there's seems to be a clear trend, and that's what I'll say about that.
Mike has his hand up.
John.
I don't want to interrupt the flow of the meeting, but just, while this group's assembled, I had a question that I wanted to get out there, which is that, should there be, movement on, for example, the Schronz estate? Are we contemplating impact fees on that?
Well, we don't have one.
Or are
So-
there impact fees,
Well,
with
I mean-
residential?
well, we have an impact fee that we don't think is legal, so we've not been applying it. And we,
They have their own system. So
and,
it's-
and, well, Mike asked if there are impact fees on residential. I mean, so just, to address where we've been on impact fees, and we have money in the budget to do an impact fee analysis. Unfortunately, I don't know if it's in the right budget, because what we've discussed is doing a water impact fee, and the money for the study is in the general fund. So, lots to learn and figure out and improve on there. But at any rate, so we may have a water fund impact fee on presumably any development that connects to the water system in the future. We may not, depending on the outcome of the study. It seems unlikely we'll have any other kind of impact fee. The Schronz estate, if they develop, would build their own water system. So they would not be subject to any kind of Town of Alta water system impact fee.
Thank you,
And
Chris.
the likely, part of, the reason why it's not entirely likely we'll have a water impact fee is, well, I'm not gonna go into it, but, it's a matter of scale.
Yeah, that helps me understand. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm interested in what John has to say.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
We can.
Yeah, I have just a couple of observations. One, I think I talked about the future CapEx balances. I'm encouraged that you're projecting, 490,000. I would note that that's somewhat being driven by the removal of about 170,000 of expenses that were from the FFKR study that were sort of the life safety and seismic, just the ones that you had in there in the last budget that came out, I totaled to 170,000. So I'm excited at the prospect that you think you could do the Alta Central function in the one new building. And I get it that you don't want to spend a bunch of money on Alta Central if that's going to happen. But I would note that if that turns out not to be possible, and I sort of think the right plan is to assume that we're going to keep Alta Central for 10 or 15 years of more use. And I think we should secure the building properly, spend the probably 400 or 500 grand that's going to be, and then move on and build the new building. But I guess that's all based on the space planning. And I'm just throwing out that would be my plan, would be to secure Alta Central so that we can expect 10, 15 more years of use out of it, and then build a new building. So that would change the CapEx thing somewhat. One other observation, we keep talking about moving general fund money and the excess general fund money. You got to remember that we're about to do a fairly significant loan to the water fund from the general fund. So that's in that vein, but that's a loan of, I don't know, how big a loan is that going to be?
500,000, wasn't it?
500,000?
Not quite. No, we expect it to be probably between like
250, I think,
250 and 350. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's a bullet in the chamber, John.
Yeah,
I
for
mean,
sure.
It's
That's-
definitely reducing the balance in the general fund, and we've gotten away
Yeah.
from this idea that we're gonna keep 1 year's reserve in the general fund. We're really keeping about 70 or 80% of 1 year's reserve at this point, and if we do this loan, it's gonna be even lower. I
10% lower.
think at 50% of 1 year's revenue, I'm gonna start to riot. I mean, I think that's really a minimum amount. And I'd be much happier if we were sticking with a higher number. It's interesting that the transfer, one of the things we've been talking about is that the transfer to general funds under a fair bit of pressure these days. And I see, your numbers really support that contention. We're going from $500,000 last year to 150 grand going forward. So, that it's under some pressure. And and our financial outlook is changing, and I think it's important for us to recognize that. And then 300 grand in new taxes to make this all work. It's a lot of new tax. I think you're gonna have some real opposition to the increase in the sales tax. People are gonna perceive it as you're raising taxes to pay for OLS.
We don't actually have that PRT increase.
It's not in the budget yet. It's just a discussion item. Yeah, I'm not using it. It's something we wanted to talk about,
Oh,
but
you're
I
not
haven't.
using insofar the property.
Correct.
tax, but you are counting on the truth in taxation one.
Nope, the reverse. I have the 100,000 for the property tax in my draft budget. I don't have the 200 from the TRT in there.
Yeah, that's what John's saying.
What's the
Oh,
TRT?
I didn't hear
stands
it.
for what?
Oh, the transient municipal room tax. It's
Right, so you
TRT
don't
or
have
TDL.
the new transient room tax in there, but you do have the truth in taxation.
I do, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's a total of 300,000 of new taxes. You know, I don't think that's gonna be super well received. But you know, we'll see.
Yeah, so that's why
Maybe we
I
don't
only
care.
did. Well, that's kind of why I only did the one for now, and I wanted to present it to this committee to see if we wanted to make a decision to kind of pull back on one versus the other. And it just seemed to me more like the council wanted to get into the truth and taxation every other year, so that's why I chose that one over the transient room tax, but you
I think
guys
that's
tell
right.
me.
I think that's right on. I think it's easier to sort of justify, hey, we want to be in this inflation oriented approach. And we want to keep the truth of taxation to every other year. I think that makes such good intellectual sense that people probably swallow that, you know, probably vote yes on that one. But
Yeah.
the new transient room tax, I think you're gonna have a lot of opposition to that. I mean, it's largely being driven by, you know, significantly increased spending. And people are gonna perceive it as you're raising taxes to support the OLS purchase. That's actually would be a pretty superficial understanding of it. But I think that's how people are gonna see it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, those are my comments. Otherwise, I love the improvements in the organization of these exhibits, and I'm thrilled that you are projecting CapEx balances out there 4 or 5 years. That's awesome, and I support really all the things that you guys talked about today. So
Can I just respond to a couple things that you said? So some of the, you know, modest improvements to the facilities that we're looking into for this year, we just assume our maintenance items. A couple $1,000 here, a couple $1,000 there are those are the kinds of expenses on our buildings that we've funded in the maintenance line items, basically. So that's why those don't appear in the capital plan for now. And we'll just see, you know, I guess, did we not leave, I guess we didn't leave, you know, Alpha Central seismic upgrade,
right, it came out of the
No, you
CapEx
pull that-
budget.
you
It's
wouldn't
one of
pull
the
that
ways
out.
that the CapEx budget's working.
Yeah, we just don't know what that's gonna cost, and I think there are gonna be, I mean, we're gonna talk to, you know, a structural engineer and a couple, you know, we need to get bids, obviously, but we need a kind of a scope to get bids. So we're just gonna work through that and see what it might take. And I think they're
All
gonna
of
be,
that fell out of this year's CapEx plan. Some more of that was in last year's plan. The little ones, I agree, are expense items, but some of the bigger ones that were really CapEx items kind of came out of the plan, including the 100 for seismic. But yeah, the community center upgrades, internet, that stuff came out of the CapEx plan too.
I did not highlight Mike Morey's projects in the capital slides.
Yeah, the community center upgrades, electrical,
Well, like
safety.
the interview, yeah, the interview room and the apartment for
Employee quarters.
fifth cop, apartment, yeah, right. Employee quarters for a fifth cop, which we get by splitting Mike's bedroom in half. And we probably, I don't know, should we capitalize those? I mean,
I would think
put them on
so.
the capital plan?
I
You
would
don't?
think they're capital.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they're, you know, high 4, low 5 figures each, so.
Chris,
Right,
if I
so
could,
go ahead, Craig. Yeah.
if I could just add a few comments. I know we're over our allotted time already, but I want to try to tie together some of the stuff that John and Roger and Dan have all said. I think I agree with John. I think we should do the $100,000 on the truth and taxation and not do the other stuff yet. And the key word there is yet. As Roger pointed out, we're $7.5 million in the hole, or we're $8.5 million in the hole, or we're simply not going to reinvest in our infrastructure and the stuff is going to fall apart. But I believe that John is 100% correct. If we do the tax increases right now, it'll be for Our Lady of the Snows, and it doesn't matter what the facts are.
Right.
So I think the sequence that we need to have is the following. One, to do Dan's meeting, you know, we're all in person. I agree. We can have the whole town council there perhaps, or maybe the budget committee meets first and then we have the town council there. But we need to all get on the same page as to what the numbers are. And then I think we should actually have a town hearing where we present our long-term financial plans and basically give the town people a choice. Do you want to increase taxes, or do you just want to wait until the sewer system falls apart or the water system falls apart? It is a choice. But unless we spend the time, unless we're, number one, on the same page with all the numbers, and number two, actually present it as a choice because not of our austerity budgets, but because we've systematically not reserved funds for replacement of our capital infrastructure. Nobody's going to understand it. They won't support it. And I really think it's well worth the time to do that.
You know, waiting for the toilet to back up before you fund the sewer is probably not a good plan.
Well, the other thing we need to start including in our analysis, I believe, if you're going to borrow $9 million, you're going to have to pay interest on it.
Yeah, I know.
And even 500 grand, you know, that to me, it's probably 500 grand of interest, 450, 500 grand of interest. And that's going to be a big blow to our general fund budget.
Yep.
100 grand of interest. So I think we'll be, you know, it's going to substantially realign these numbers. It's going to be hard to make any CapEx fund transfer if you're paying 500 grand in interest, as
depends
our
on
financials are.
It depends on the kind of bond, John. I mean, if it's a revenue bond against sales tax revenue, then yes, but if it's a general obligation bond against property taxes, then what? Then it's the taxpayers that cover that. Property taxpayers. That's just how that's how GEO bond
Well,
works. And that's why
is that really fair to say that the taxpayers are going to cover, you know, the property taxpayers are going to cover the cost of the new building?
Yeah, good question.
Seems pretty hard on the taxpayers.
Would they have to vote on it? They would. They have to. The council would have to put it on a ballot, and the voters would have to approve it.
Yeah. So that would be. I'm not sure that would be a layup.
No, I would not be a layup. No. I mean, that's the kind of thing that. Sometime, you know, you saw what happened in Salt Lake County with the $500 million for a jail. You know.
Yep.
Yeah. We've never done well. I assume when we bonded for the Bay City Tunnel, that was a revenue bond against water rates. But what's that?
I haven't seen any of the stuff from that.
Yeah, so you
So
know,
could you go back again? If it's a general fund obligation,
general obligation.
why isn't tax revenue figured into that?
That's a revenue bond. They're just different they're just different mechanisms, and a revenue bond, I think, is literally against, well, it's against a certain revenue stream to the municipality. And then it's sort of a semantic challenge, I think, but the general obligation bond is a bond that property taxpayers pay off. So, you know, when
Well,
I
sort of
voted,
separately from the general fund, it's like accounted for sort of separately from the general fund.
I don't know how the accounting would work, but I mean, you know, in Salt Lake County, or well, in Salt Lake City, on my property tax bill, I help the city pay off a $90 million streets bond, and I help the school district pay off a whatever $250 million bond through my property tax bill.
Yeah, but
So we
Chris,
just
you're really
don't
just
see-
emphasizing what you said earlier, which is we need to get a
Oh, yeah.
bond person retained so that we know what the hell we're talking about. Because if we don't know what the hell we're talking about, the taxpayers are going to rightly turn us down.
Yes,
And
it's not,
this is back to my
not even
point.
on the basketball court.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think you should figure out what it costs, who the right bond expert is, and we really need to do that before we actually have our half day or whatever it is, budget committee meeting, which we need to do before we
Well,
approach the taxpayers.
and let's really just add that, like, 9 million is a huge number in Alta. For a public facility. There are other options. There are so many other options.
Oh,
Depending on what kind of facility it is, there are grants where there'd probably be a
Yep.
match. We need to, we did not ask FFKR to assume any UDOT programming in a new building on this site, but
I,
we really should.
Yeah, we should.
Because
Snow
they
plow.
have a need. Yeah, they have a need, and we have a need
Yep.
for them to meet that need, and they've got resources.
Yep.
Mike has mentioned the possibility of partnering with Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office on some stuff. It seems a little bit like the camel's nose under the tent, and the sheriff taking over law enforcement out there. But at any rate, I mean, those are some opportunities for us to explore if we are going to build a new building on the site. So, and those could
Well, just to
really
give
take
it some perspective and some scale, we're talking about raising property taxes this year through the truth in taxation from 383 to 500. So when you talk about the interest on a $9 million bond, you're talking about, I'm going to say, nearly doubling, essentially doubling the property tax. So that's
Wow.
it's going to be a tough sledding on that path.
Yeah.
No doubt, yeah.
but I think we owe it to the community to open that dialogue anyway, even if
Yeah.
ultimately they vote it down because it goes to a
Yeah.
vote, like to a public vote. I don't mean town council.
Yeah, I mean,
Because then it becomes a community decision to say, we don't think it's a legitimate use of an increase in tax to support the bigger infrastructure that we're discussing. We're sort of presenting that case, I think, based on the 2 retreats we've held so far and the prioritization of the AMO and the increase in complexity and scale. But ultimately, the community, we have to, all of us, make a community choice. Your points are all valid, John. I'm not arguing. I think that's part of what I think as the leaders, we owe it to them to say, if we think we need this infrastructure, we have to be able to get there. And the partnering, I think, in granting, whether it's UDOT, which I'm in favor of, the sheriff's office, not so much,
I shouldn't say that.
by which we can get there at a more reasonable cost and lower taxation. If we shape that correctly, I think we can get it across the goal line. Obviously, I'm in support of that. But if we decide as a town not to do that, it changes our plan to what do we do with the current Alta Central, because that's what we're stuck with. And we have to make that building work, which I think is the poorer of the 2 options, but we can do it. We'll make it happen, to your point, John.
I agree with all that, Dan, obviously. And the one thing I would say is that Mike's AMO room fell out of the CapEx budget you're going to present to the council this afternoon. Like, I thought there was going to be allowance in there for Mike's room and it's not in this budget.
I forgot. Yep.
Well, maybe you just never supported Mike, Chris. Maybe that's part of the problem.
Uh,
It's
All right,
like,
guys, I gotta run. I apologize, and I apologize that I'm missing the important meeting later today, but you don't need my voice at that one. You got plenty of people. All right, thanks a lot.
all right, see you, Craig.
Wait, hold on. We have to adjourn this meeting, properly.
That's it.
No, it's okay. I think we're done, right? I just want to make sure I have a quorum still and that everybody else doesn't drop off. So do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
Second,
Second. Okay, Roger, all in favor?
aye.
Aye.
Aye. See you guys later today.
Yep.
Thanks for
Oh,
letting
yeah.
me sit in on your meeting today. I appreciate it.
See you.
Thank
thanks,
you.
Tom.
Good to have you.
Thank you.